In 12th century, and tensions are high in the Holy Land. The city of Edessa, which was under Christian control, gets snagged by the Muslim Seljuk Turks in 1144. This totally ticks off the Pope and the European nobles. So, what do? They decide to launch a massive military campaign, the Second Crusade, to take back Edessa and show those Seljuk Turks who's boss. Now, they weren't just focused on Edessa. The Crusaders also had their eyes set on some other targets. They wanted to kick some butt in the Iberian Peninsula against the Muslim Moors and in the Baltic against some pagan Europeans. So, it wasn't just about Edessa, but it was part of a bigger picture. Imagine this: the Pope sends out a call to arms, promising forgiveness for sins and protection for your property and family if you join the crusade. Plus, they sweeten the deal by saying they'll even cancel your debts. That's a pretty tempting offer, right? So, about 60,000 eager crusaders from all over Europe sign up for the adventure. Now, here's where it gets interesting. For the first time ever, two kings, Conrad III of Germany and Louis VII of France, decide to lead the charge themselves. It's like a medieval buddy cop movie, but with swords and armor instead of guns and badges. They gather their troops and head off on this epic journey, crossing Europe and eventually reaching Constantinople. Along the way, they pick up more soldiers from Italy, Northern Europe, and even more French troops who took the scenic route by sea. But just when they thought they were making progress, Nuadin, the successor to the guy who captured Edessa, shows up and ruins the party. He trashes the place again, slaughtering the men and enslaving the women and children, just like before. So, while the main focus was on recapturing Edessa, there were these side missions happening in Iberia and the Baltic. Picture this: the Pope sends out a bunch of crusaders to sail off to the east, but they get roped into helping out in Iberia first. See, the land armies were taking their sweet time getting to the Holy Land, so they figured, hey, let's put these sailors to good use in the meantime. A fleet of Genoese ships packed with crusaders set sail for Lisbon to help out King Alfonso Henriques of Portugal. They get there and kick off this classic siege on June 28, 1147. After a few months of intense fighting, Lisbon falls on October 24, 1147. Some of these crusaders stick around and keep fighting against the Muslims in Spain, capturing cities like Almeria and Tortosa, but they hit a snag when they try to take Jaén. Meanwhile, up in the Baltic, there's a whole other crusade happening. Led by German and Danish nobles, they're going after the pagan Wends. It's not just about conquering land this time, they're also trying to convert these non-Christians. They have some success, taking over places like Dobin and Malhau, but overall, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The Baltic would become a hot spot for crusades in the centuries to come, especially with the Teutonic Knights rolling in later on. Now, let's talk about the Byzantine Empire. The emperor at the time, Manuel Komnenos, he's trying to play nice with the crusaders, but he's also keeping a close eye on them. He's worried they might have their sights set on his empire, especially now that Jerusalem is back in Christian hands. But here's the kicker: as these crusaders make their way through Byzantine territory, they're causing all sorts of trouble. Despite Manuel's orders to behave themselves, they're pillaging, looting, and even worse. Manuel tries to hurry them along their way, but there's still tension brewing. When the French and German contingents finally reach Constantinople in 1147, things go from bad to worse. The French are furious to learn that Manuel has made a truce with the Turks, thinking he's more worried about them than the Crusaders. Some of them even want to storm Constantinople itself. Meanwhile, the Germans are dealing with their own disaster, getting wiped out by a freak flood. Eventually, they all get the message to keep moving east, but it's too little too late. They ignore Manuel's advice to stick to the coast and end up facing a huge Muslim army in Asia Minor. And let's just say, it doesn't end well. So, after the mess in Constantinople, things just kept going downhill for the Crusaders. Conrad III and his German army were the first to hit a major snag. They didn't plan well and didn't listen to the locals, which, surprise surprise, led to disaster. They were ill-prepared for the tough terrain and ran out of food. Then, on October 25, 1147, they got ambushed by a bunch of Seljuk Turks near Dorilayan. Conrad got hurt, and they had to retreat to Nicaea. Louis VII, hearing about the German fiasco, was determined to push on. He managed to score a win against the Seljuks in December 1147, thanks to his fancy cavalry. But that victory was short-lived. In January 1148, they got wrecked in a big battle in the Cadmus Mountains. The Crusader army was all spread out, and the Seljuks took advantage of the chaos. As they trudged on, they did have a few small wins here and there, but overall, it was a disaster. And get this, they hadn't even reached their target yet. They were supposed to be heading for northern Syria, but they were already knee-deep in trouble. Now, let's talk about the siege of Damascus. Louis VII and his beaten-up crew finally rode into Antioch in March 1148. But instead of taking Raymond of Antioch's advice to head north, they decided to go south. Rumor has it, Louis was a bit distracted because he found out his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine and her uncle Raymond were getting cozy behind his back. Awkward, right? Anyway, they all gather at Acre and decide to go for Damascus instead of Edessa. It was a strategic move, considering Damascus was a big threat to Jerusalem. So, they show up at Damascus on July 24, 1148, ready to kick some butt. But guess what? They barely lasted 4 days before they had to bail. Bad planning strikes again. Some folks thought maybe the defenders bribed the Christians inside the city to stay quiet. Others blamed the Byzantines. But honestly, it was probably just the fact that the Crusaders were unprepared and outnumbered. With a big Muslim army on the way to help defend Damascus, they didn't stand a chance. So, Conrad III decides to pack it in and head back to Europe in September 1148. Louis VII, after a little sightseeing tour of the Holy Land, follows suit 6 months later. And just like that, the Second Crusade, which started with so much promise, ends with a whimper. So, the Second Crusade wasn't just a letdown for the Crusaders, it also messed things up for Byzantium. See, while Conrad III was off gallivanting in the Holy Land, Byzantium was left vulnerable. The Norman king Roger II of Sicily saw this as his chance to cause some trouble. In 1147, he went on a rampage, attacking places like Kerkyra, Euboea, Corinth, and Thebes. Manuel tried to get Louis VII on his side against Roger, but it didn't work out. Then, in 1149, things went from bad to worse for Byzantium. They had to deal with a pesky Serbian uprising and an attack on Constantinople by George of Antioch's fleet. But hey, they managed to recapture Kerkyra, so that's something. Meanwhile, Nu'uddin, the guy everyone was worried about, kept on expanding his empire. He snagged Antioch in June 1149, chopping off its ruler Raymond's head in the process. Raymond, who also happened to be the Count of Edessa, got thrown in prison, and just like that, Edessa was wiped off the map by 1100. Nu'uddin didn't stop there. He went on to grab Damascus in 1154, uniting Muslim Syria under his rule. Manuel tried to fight back with some successful campaigns from 1158 to 1176, but it was clear that the Muslims weren't going anywhere. And then, things took a turn for the worse when Nu'uddin's general Shirkuh conquered Egypt in 1168. This set the stage for an even bigger threat to Christendom, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt. His big win at the Battle of Hattin in 1187 would kick off the Third Crusade in 1189, and the rest, as they say, is history.